years. What doesn't get given through this month of July, we will add on the extra hearts next July. So we'll let you know how far we're getting on our $30,000 next July as we begin to do this again. We'll add in how many more hearts, how many more thousand we have to knock off that 30,000. I believe it is an attainable goal that we can do, and we are very thankful for those of you who have been extremely generous and have helped us so far to help make sure our mortgage gets paid down faster. We're in a series this month that, if you don't mind me, I'm just going to sit down, because I almost feel like as we go through this series, and especially as we start going through this first one, it's almost a little bit where I want to be, how do I say, more casual? I want to sit down and talk to you almost like a dad would his kids. Now, I know you guys are not my kids, and I'm not trying to say that, but I want to talk about something about the reality of something we all face, and that is doubt. There is something that all of us at times in our life we're going to struggle with, and as a pastor, it is almost weekly that I hear of someone either on the news feed that's coming into my thing, from someone in the church, from someone outside the church, from someone in the family, from someone somewhere who is struggling with some form of doubt. We're at a spot where we hear so much more about it today than we ever used to. You guys will have heard about some famous pastor who has made a mistake and gone off, done something, or a pastor who's given up his faith, or a famous musician who's thrown it aside, someone who is deconstructing their faith. It's a big term we hear today, someone who's deconstructing their faith. And as we hear it, the reality is that for those of us who are pastors, there's these two things that start going up. There's this one of, what? Where did that come from? But then there's this other side of me that begins to go, you know what? My heart hurts for them, not for the fact of they've given up their faith. And by the way, that hurts. But one of the things that we begin to understand and we realize is that our faith does more for us than simply give us a free ticket into heaven. What you believe in gives you a foundation of something to stand on. What you say you believe stops and helps you to be able to figure out what is right and what is wrong. It gives you the ability, what you believe in gives you the ability on how you see death and life. When you stand at the graveside of someone you love, how do you view what comes next? You see, what we believe and what we hold to be true, your faith sits at the core of who you are. And for so many people today, as we look at and we find this moment when we begin to doubt, we face this moment of crisis. For whatever reason, whatever causes us to doubt, it leaves us feeling extremely vulnerable. It leads us to question our identity. It leads us to question our past. It leads us to question our values. It even leads us to question what is our future going to hold. Doubt, if it is left unchecked, leads to despair. James, Jesus' half-brother, he makes this statement that I think is so true, and this is the King James Version. Usually I give you out of the New Living Translation, but I like the way that the translators of the King James Version wrote this, and he writes this in James 1:8, and he says this: a double-minded man, he's unstable in all his ways. In other words, a person who is constantly left at a place of doubt feels lost, confused, and doesn't know where to turn. And here's the truth. One of the things that we do not like to admit is that almost all of us this morning will face doubt. Now, facing doubt by itself is not new to you. You find yourself almost daily doubting many, many things. We're starting a political season, and when every time a politician says, trust me, we do what? We doubt. When you go to your doctor, now, let's hold on. They are good, Randy. But isn't it true that anytime you go to your doctor and you hear something that the doctor you don't want to hear him say, you do what? You doubt. Let me go check that with someone else. Let me check that again. How many opinions do I need? But we doubt. When you go to the mechanic and the mechanic says, ooh, that is going to cost you, you go, I'm doubting you. When you get on the road and you see the way drivers drive, you begin to doubt they even know how to drive. When an insurance agent comes back to you and says, this is what your bill's going to cost you, you go, I'm going to doubt that. And we seek. When you turn on the social media, or you turn on the news, or you turn on whatever, we doubt. And there's a good reason why we doubt most things, isn't it? Right? Because over the years, we have learned that not everyone is as honest with us as we would like them to be. We all know that learning to doubt, though it may leave us feeling vulnerable, it also allows us to make better decisions. But how does this work when it comes to your faith? What do we do when sometimes when it comes to our faith, doubt begins to creep in? We're not talking about your mechanic who says, yeah, you need to replace your O-rings. They're kind of getting bad. Your shocks, they're a little bit, Yeah, there's a problem with, and we got good reason to doubt. But what about when it comes to your faith? You know that your faith is so important because your faith is a foundation of not what you're driving, but of who you are, what you believe, your morals, your values. Your faith is sometimes the very foundation of your family life. So when doubt begins to set in, what do we do? And can I ask you another question? Is it wrong to doubt your faith? You see, I grew up at a time in my life when to doubt your faith was just, it's not what you did. I kind of mentioned last week as we were beginning to look about, as we were looking at the idea that we've been given some solid, sound words that we can follow as people who follow Jesus Christ. We also began to look at this idea that we kind of grew up with this, well, for many of us, if you've been in church for a while, you've heard this little saying, if God said it, I believe it, that settles it. Okay, if you're as old as I am and have been in church for as long as I am, you've heard somebody say this, if God said it, I believe it, and that settles it. And of course, they get a certain voice, okay. You guys know, you've heard it. And we simply get to a point where we almost, if we are struggling with doubt, we begin to do what? I can't do it. I'm not allowed to doubt. Because God said it, right? If God said it, I must believe it. Yet I'm going to be honest with you, you may say this on the outward, and in fact, as Christians, sometimes we hold this bravado up so much so that we don't want anyone else to know we doubt. And so we take that doubt that we have and we begin to push it inside. We begin to try to say, no, I'm not listening. You know, it's like when your spouse is trying to talk to you and you're pretending like you don't hear them. Okay. I see you guys. You guys know what I'm talking about. When your husband talks to you or your wife talks to you and you're going, la, 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 and they look at you and they said, did you just hear me? And you go, what? Sorry? Okay. That's what we do with doubt. It is there, but what do we do with it? Let's just pretend like we don't hear it. Let's shove it down a little bit. Let's ignore it. It's not really there. The problem is that as you continue to deal with doubt in that matter, what happens when something happens in your life that no longer makes sense? When your faith runs up against a doubt that is so big, an experience that is so hard, that you look at it and you go, I can't ignore this one. And can I say this? If you have not already been there, you will. You will come to a moment and a place and a time in your life. And this is one of the things why I love young musicians, and a lot of our worship music we sing in church, but I also find that a lot of times they're written by young followers of Jesus Christ who are so on fire, and I love it for it. But you also hear in the background, you haven't been through a hard time yet. Yeah, we believe in God, He's going to do it. And we do, but the problem is that we all know we're going to come to a moment when doubt is going to raise its head so big that we cannot push it down, we cannot set it aside. And we're going to do something in this moment. In this moment, we're going to stop and we're going to go, yes, it's all true. I've been a fool for all these years for simply going along with it, and it's not true. My faith is just something, it's been a lie. You see, if you do not begin to deal with doubt properly, you're going to be stopped and you're going to find yourself at a moment when as that doubt, as that situation comes up, you will have nowhere to go with it but to give in to it. Today, we have a plethora, that's my big word for the day. We have an abundance of people who are stopping and deconstructing their faith and trying to figure out, where do I stand? When I do not have a faith that I thought I could stand on, when I no longer have that, where do I stand? And they begin to deconstruct their faith only to try to construct something else, because the reality is that you do not just deconstruct your faith. You will begin to put your faith into something else. By the way, there is no such thing as having no faith. There is no such thing as a true atheist. Because we all believe in something. It's just what we choose to believe in and what is our foundation. So as we begin to deconstruct our faith, as we begin to stop and say the values, my morals, everything that I have no longer hold any truth, we need to stop and say, well, what is our truth? What are we going to stand on? What are our values? And there will be a new system that comes into place. That's just the reality. Now, if you don't think where I'm talking about is true, if you don't think that we are dealing with an idea of of people deconstructing their faith, let me just say this. If you don't know how bad this is, just ask your family. Ask your brothers, your sisters. What do you believe in today? Is your faith still the same one that you had when you were 10, 20? And by the way, I'm not saying it should be the same as the faith you had when you were 10 or 20. In fact, I think it should be bigger and better. But here's the reality. It's not just your brothers and sisters who are going to be struggling with this. It could be your mom. It could be your dad. By the way, if you want to know the truth, the largest number of people dropping out of church today and walking away from their faith are not college kids. They're people in their 60s and their 70s. We only hear about all of the 20-year-olds and the 30-year-olds who are deconstructing their faith. We never talk about the 60s and 70-year-olds who are just simply saying it's not working. Ask your grandkids. No, don't ask your kids because they will tell you. So ask your grandkids, where are you at? Ask your nieces and nephews. You don't have to even ask your neighbor. You can go directly in your family and begin to say, where are you at in your faith? What does your faith mean to you? Do you believe? And all of a sudden you're going to get this straight across their eyes and they're going to say, do you really want to know? Why are so many people struggling in doubt with their faith? Do we even have an answer? Do we have the question to ask in the first place? Why are so many people deconstructing their faith? Why do we have so many doubts when it comes to faith? Can we explore it for just a moment? Number one, and I think I put a whole bunch. Now, by the way, I stuck some things up here, but this is like just scratching the surface, because you know as well as I do, this doesn't even begin to answer the reasons why we have doubts. But the faith that you had when you were a child, does it make sense anymore? When you were in Sunday school, they began to teach you about Noah's Ark and the flood, and now you're sitting in college going, am I going to truly tell anyone I believe in Noah's Ark and the flood? When they talk about Jesus walking on the water, am I going to tell anyone I believe Jesus walked on the water? I mean, let's go to the book of Revelation. I mean, there's like wheels with eyes and stuff in it. I mean, am I going to tell anyone I believe in the book of Revelation? And we begin to go that which I believed as a child begins to hit us back in the face, and we go, I don't know what to believe anymore. Have you ever found yourself in a church where someone tried to control what you did and what you thought and what you said and how you acted? If you've ever been in a church where that has been abusive, you know this, is that we get to a place where we go, I'm tired of people trying to control my life. What I should do, what I should give, what I should wear, what I should think, how I should act. Faith and science, they just don't add up. They don't make sense. We're coming into election season. You can't be a Christian unless you vote a certain way, right? You ever tried to live like a Christian? I mean, have you ever tried to follow those teachings of Jesus Christ? If someone smacks you on one cheek, you should do what? And so sometimes we find ourselves struggling because the commands that Jesus gave us to actually help us, they become too hard. It's just not the way we want to live today. It's just not cool. I mean, there was a time for a while, it seemed like in the early 90s through the 90s and even into the early 2000s, when being a Christian was almost kind of cool. There were a lot of people who, some of the celebrities that were following Jesus Christ. And I mean, It was almost cool. Hey, I'm a Christian. We're kind of getting past that time now. It's not cool again. Have you ever met this one? And this is the reason why so many people begin to doubt their faith. Have you ever met a Christian who is just mean and judgmental? Yeah. But I've also met some atheists who are mean and judgmental, and it hasn't made me want to be an atheist. But there's a reality. There's a truth that we must admit to. There are a lot of reasons, by the way, why we begin to doubt our faith. For so many of us, what we accepted as a child, as we become adults, becomes a little bit harder to live out. Can I say this? Doubt is normal. If you're sitting here going, yeah, I've been trying to deal with this with my kids for a while, and I've been trying to beat it into their head, like, you got to stop, you just got to believe, you just got to believe, you just got to believe. Can I just say this? Doubt is normal. In fact, doubt is actually healthy. And in fact, the Bible does not shy away from people who have doubted their faith. In fact, if you go through the Old Testament, it is just full of so many people who doubted their faith. And as we go to the New Testament, there's a famous story that I love. There's an incident where Jesus came across this father who had a child who was beginning to go through some serious issues. Now, for those of us who are parents, you know you would do anything for your child, right? Well, here was a father who had a child who was beginning, this child would have seizures. It would foam at the mouth. In the moment of these seizures, it would begin to kind of froth at the mouth. It would then go stiff. It would have these moments when they were trying to make meals, and the kid would go through these seizures, and they would end up into the fire. If they were trying to bathe them, it would have a seizure, and it would try to. And the only conclusion that the father could come up with is that my son must be possessed by demons. And it made sense to him. And if you were in that day, you too would believe that. And by the way, Jesus does not argue the fact that if he was or wasn't, we don't know. The argument is not the fact. All we know is that the father came to Jesus and says, Jesus, can you heal my son? And Jesus makes this little statement to him, and he says, basically, the dad went to the disciples first, and the disciples couldn't do anything about it. And Jesus comes along and says, guys, what are you doing? And they kind of explain it to him, and he kind of looks down and he says, oh, guys. And the dad says, Jesus, can you do something? Your disciples can't do it. We've been around all over town and nobody can do anything. Can you do anything? And Jesus looks at the dad and he says, if you believe, if you can trust me, I can heal your son. That sounds good, doesn't it? Only problem is where do you go? I love how the dad responds, because in his honesty, he says this. The father instantly cried out, I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. The hope and the expectation, from the bottom of my heart, I want to cling on to something that I know to be true. I want this to be that moment when my son gets healed. And I believe it, I'm going to hold on to it. But, you ever been there? You see, this dad has probably been all over town already. He had heard so many times, take this, do this. Believe me, we can do this. And every time the son was not healed. And so as Jesus is looking at his father, he says, if you trust me, if you can put your hope and trust in who I am, I can heal your son. And the father says, I believe, but there's still doubt going on in my mind. We've all heard it before, haven't we? Even in our faith, haven't we heard it before? For just $29.95. I can send you a wallet that will never run out. Please, I'm not trying to make fun. I just know that sometimes we find ourselves in such desperate situations. We do what? I'll give you 20. If you can send me, hey, here's the reality. We all find ourselves at moments wanting to believe something, and yet in the back of our mind, we're going, I'm just not sure. Peter, one of Jesus' closest friends. Even after seeing the resurrection, he began to believe that God was Jesus was who he said he was, that he was God in human form. He still dealt and struggled with doubt. Peter found himself coming to a place where I believe he is who he says he is, but I do not believe he can literally forgive me. I do not believe he can have any place for me in his coming kingdom. And after the resurrection, Peter found himself, and the doubt that Peter began to felt didn't just cause him to struggle. It actually began to rub off on his other disciples. So, we begin to understand this, and we begin to read about this doubt that begins to set in of where Peter's going, I don't have a place. And by the way, if you're here this Tuesday night, we're going to kind of try to dig into this, probably this portion of Scripture just a little more to tease it out a bit more. But here's what happened. In John 21, verses 2 and 3, mentions this moment of Peter. Now, here's how John writes. He says, several of the disciples were there. Simon Peter, since this was about him. Thomas, the one who was nicknamed the twin. Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. In other words, there were 7 disciples in all that were sitting there. Peter's doubt is beginning to rub off on them of, I don't know what, yeah. And Simon Peter says what? Now, we think of fishing today as, I'm going down the river and I'm going to throw my line and I'm going to go fishing. That's not what is being said. Simon Peter was a fisherman before following Jesus Christ. He had followed Jesus Christ with this idea that he was going to do something great in what God was going to do. That was the belief. He had given up everything to follow. After his denial, it all went out the window. And we're going to see that if you read on farther on down, you kind of get the picture of what's going on. But Peter responds, I'm going fishing. In other words, he's saying, I don't believe God wants or values who I am anymore. I've messed up. It was too big of a mistake. The others said, we'll come with you. And so they all went out in a boat. But they forgot how to fish. No, that doesn't say what it says. It just says, so they caught nothing all night. Though Peter knew and believed who God was, the doubt that came in was not in who he was, but that God could still love him and forgive him. It wasn't the doubt that arose in Peter's life was not the doubt that says, I do not believe in my faith. It was a doubt, and I believe who he is. I just don't think he wants me. Is there doubt? Is there a place for doubt in your faith? And I'm going to answer this with the largest yes that I can. Doubt is what will cause you to seek out truth. Doubt will help you sort out your faith from that which was a childish faith to that which is a grown-up faith. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 11, Paul makes this statement. He says, when I was a child, I spoke as a child. I thought as a child. And I reasoned as a child. But when I grew up, I put away childish things. Doubt is not the enemy of our faith. It is what you're going to do with your doubt. If you simply try to hide it, suppress it, push it down, or just to live in doubt, then you will constantly find yourself in a state of crisis. But there is hope for us in our doubts. It can help you find truth. What's real? What is fictional? All right, I'm just going to give you 3 things. Here's 3 things as you are facing doubt. And by the way, if you are not facing doubt, you will. So just put these things. If you're not going through it, there's not something right now in your life saying, I got this moment of I'm doubting. Put this in the back of your brain and just kind of store it, because you will face it. So I'm going to give you 3 things on how to face doubt in a way that is healthy. First, I want you to be honest. Ask the question, why am I doubting? Who am I doubting? What is it that you're struggling with? You see, there's a huge difference on what causes us to doubt. What is causing you to doubt? Are you doubting in who Jesus is? I do not believe Jesus to be God. I am doubting in is there even a God? I am doubting Christians, that there are people who say they love God and they act a certain way. Are you doubting the reality of prayer? Are you doubting what you read in the Bible? You see, here's the reality. Your doubt is going to come from many different directions. And by the way, what you doubt today, you may finally get settled only to find another doubt to come up tomorrow. Face it head on. And I'm going to make a suggestion. As you begin to find that doubt beginning to wiggle its way into your mind, beginning to cause you to struggle, would you do me a favor? Would you take that and would you write it down? Literally write what it is you're doubting. Put it in print. By the way, this is a good thing too. When you're having a problem with your spouse, write it out and put it in print. You know why? Because what you see written out helps you to begin to process what you are dealing with. Sometimes you begin to look at it and go, oh, that was stupid. I can't believe I'm even looking at it this way. I'm trying to figure this out, and I'm so mad at them because, okay, do the same with doubt. Because as you begin to try to figure out a solution, and by the way, this is true, when you're having a problem with your spouse and you begin to write it out and you go with, here's the problem. If it's there in black and white, you can go, here's what we can do. And as you come up with a solution, the problem is if you don't write it out, you know what you do? Well, no, that's not really the problem. And you begin to add, and what was sort of a problem ends up morphing into 5 other. Write it out. What is causing you to doubt? The reality is that so much of our doubt has nothing to do with what we believe and has more to do with what we feel. Write it out. Be honest with your doubt. By the way, if God is God, He's big enough for your doubt. If God cannot handle your doubt, He is not worth following. He's big enough. Write it out. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with God. Why am I struggling? Do I just not like what Jesus taught? Why am I struggling with what Jesus taught? What is it that is causing the problem? Number 2, this is not necessarily going to help you with the doubt, but it does help you stop and figure out your next move. What is the alternative? By the way, some of your doubts that you have may be a good reason. You might have a good reason to doubt it. There might be a good reason why you're struggling with it, and you need to put it out. But at the same time, whatever the reason, you need to look at the alternative, and we should do this with whatever we do. When you go to the car dealership and you're looking at a car, and you're going, ooh, I like that one, and I like that one, and I like that one. But as you begin to sort it all out, and I'm beginning to have a doubt about this one. Well, what is the alternative? If I don't want that one, what's the alternative? When you, in your faith, begin to stop and say, I'm struggling with this certain area, what is the alternative? You see, there is no such thing as simply removing something from your life. You will replace it. You don't believe in God? Well, what will you believe in? You don't think the Bible has any authority in your life? Well, what will have authority in your life? Something will replace what you are struggling with. So, two, what is the alternative? Write down what you think is the alternative, because the reality is that sometimes what we see as the alternative leads us to the motive of why we are doubting. I want an alternative, and so I'm looking for a reason to doubt. It's good to know. It helps. Number three. And we don't really want this one. I've got to be honest with you. So many of us do not really want this one. Seek the truth. We want to doubt, and we want to go a certain direction, and so we begin to destruct. And I find this fascinating, because I was looking at some people who have deconstructed their faith recently. And the alternative where they have gone makes no sense. I mean, you're talking about they've reconstructed a new faith system. It doesn't make sense. I mean, I'm talking about some weird stuff. Why? How did they get there? I don't know. But if you're going to doubt, and if you're going to find truth, then look for truth. You know this. You cannot simply trust an experience. An experience is not truth. I know that sounds funny. Let me explain this to you. Randy knows this because you see it in doctors' offices all the time. When you are on a medication, and I remember this when Benjamin was coming out of his surgery and he had a certain medication running through his system. There was an experience that he experienced at the time of that medication that was not true. And it was a good experience he was having. You all know this. You go through times in your life, you go through times in your marriage, you go through times in your family, you go through times in all sorts of things that in the moment lead you to an experience, but that experience does not give you the full truth. It simply gives you a snapshot of how you feel in a moment. And we know this because ask the same question 10 hours later, 10 days later, 10 weeks later, and you will get a totally different response. I'm not discounting the experience. I'm simply saying don't put your trust in the experience. You need to seek out the truth. What is causing the doubt? What will answer the question? For those of you who are beginning to find a spot and you say, I need some answers and I don't know where to begin to seek truth. I don't know how to begin to find truth. I'm going to give you 3 books. These are 3 books that I love. I think they're awesome. These may not be the answers you're looking for, but it is going to take work, and there's 3 books. I love C.S. Lewis's book. And by the way, C.S. Lewis was an avowed atheist for several years. You know C.S. Lewis, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Amazing guy. Brain sharper than... He wrote a book called Mere Christianity. It has probably been one of the most influential books by a guy who was an atheist who said, I can no longer make it work out in my life. Josh McDowell was an agnostic. And for one of his thesis statements for college, he began to write an article to prove why he was an agnostic. And in that, trying to prove of the reasons he had for being an agnostic, he became a follower of Jesus Christ. He wrote a book called it Evidence That Demands a Verdict. Lee Strobel also wrote a book. Lee Strobel was an investigative journalist who was an atheist. He was an avowed atheist, and his wife came to Christ, and he said, I can't handle this. I've got to prove her wrong. And as an avowed atheist, as an investigative journalist, he said, you know how I'm going to do it? I'll write a series of articles to prove she is wrong. Now, by the way, that's not the best way to win points with your wife. But as he did it, he came to only one conclusion. That he was who he said he was. He wrote a book called A Case for Christ. By the way, Lee Strobel today went from being an investigative journalist to today he's a pastor of a church. There are people who have doubted. We should not fear our doubts, but we should face them head on and seek. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Look, here's what I believe. I believe if you truly seek the truth, Jesus is there to be found. But if you come in that conclusion that, no, Pastor, I think you're wrong, you in your own mind need to settle it for yourself. If you do not believe who he says he is, but after you have done the research, then you need to know that. There is no reason for you to pretend you are something that you are not. It will leave you confused. It will leave you sitting on shaky ground and hurt. Now, as much as I do not want to say this, but if after you do the research for yourself honestly, and you come to the conclusion that he is not who he said he was, then you need to know it. And you need to be honest. I do not believe that doubt is the enemy of faith. In fact, I believe doubt leads us to hope in our faith. It causes us to search. It causes us to seek. It causes us to seek answers that go beyond simply, my mom and dad said it, therefore I believe it. You need a solid foundation for your life. And as we begin to go the next couple weeks, we're only in week 1, we're going to go more positive.